My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name in the order papers.
My Lords, the United Kingdom commends the Zimbabwean voters for their peaceful participation in Zimbabwe's recent elections. However, the UK shares the view expressed in international election observation missions' preliminary statements that the pre-election period and the election day fell short of regional and international standards. The UK is also concerned about the lack of transparency surrounding the compiling of results by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and the severe disruption of domestic observation.
My Lords, it was very obvious to every independent observer that those elections were not free and fair. In the words of Nelson Chamisa himself, they were a blatant and gigantic fraud. But the hard-hitting SADC report questioned the credibility of the elections and the breaches of its own standards. And as the saddest thing is, as the election observers left, sadly, the familiar pattern of widespread arrests, abductions and torture of grassroots supporters of the opposition is taking place as we speak all over the country. Even lawyers being arrested last night in a hospital where they were representing tortured victims, the same kind of retribution that Mugabe did after 2008. Does the noble Lord agree that now is the time for full support by His Majesty's Government for SADC's efforts to resolve the crisis, and in particular for our newly arrived ambassador to re-evaluate all facets of our relationship with the Zimbabwean government that flouts its own laws and through acts of violence and torture, and to give some hope, even in the darkest days, to the preservation and courage of the Zimbabwean people?
My Lords, the noble lady refers to the arrival of our new ambassador who arrived today, and he brings both diplomatic and development experience, and I'm sure he'll do an exemplary role in our relations with Zimbabwe, the communities in Zimbabwe and all parties in Zimbabwe as well. The noble lady mentioned about the abduction and torture of opposition CCC members, which we have raised directly. I can report that we're relieved that they have been found and are receiving treatment for their injuries. We also note the arrest and subsequent bail of 2 lawyers acting on behalf of the alleged victims on the 4th of September.
The government's present concerns, and indeed those of Baroness who are quite correct, but would he accept also that Zimbabwe is potentially a vast country of potentially great wealth, and that in the longer term we shall actually need its markets, its support in keeping the Russians and Chinese from dominating the whole of Africa, and its raw materials? Would he accept that, despite the present difficulties, and remembering that once Zimbabwe was a member of the Commonwealth and could be once again in the future, but clearly not now, would he accept that these things should be kept in the back of our minds?
My Lords, I agree with my noble friend who speaks with great insight and experience on these matters, and particularly with respect to the Commonwealth. That provides a real alternative to countries around the world in terms of the membership and the unique nature of the Commonwealth as an institution. However, any country seeking to join must abide by standards, and of course ultimately that decision is for all members of the Commonwealth.
The Minister.
Lords, I have just returned from Zimbabwe. I was a member of the Commonwealth Observer Group, and I have to say that we did a very extensive report, the interim statement of which should be found for all members in the library. There were, I have to say, quite a lot of factors which did lead us to doubt the credibility of this election. There were numerous factors, many factors which would also been raised in 2018. So I think I would like to ask the Minister if he would agree that the ideal would be for Zimbabwe to re-enter the Commonwealth, but it can only do so when it meets the standards of proper democracy, the rule of law and free elections.
On the noble lady's question, I believe I've already answered that in part in response to my noble friend, but I agree with her. I commend her efforts and those of all the observer missions in observing the election, and we do hope ultimately inclusive pluralist democracies emerge and Zimbabwe can find its way back into the Commonwealth.
My Lords, it's
Crossbench.
in light of the developments in Zimbabwe the widespread violence and intimidation of voters in the rural areas, the abduction and torture of many opposition activists, the continued detention of members of parliament of the opposition. Will the UK government be rather less equivocal and make absolutely clear that it does not regard these elections as free and fair, that the government of Zimbabwe has no legitimacy, and as long as it is the case, it will not be readmitted to the Commonwealth as far as Britain is concerned, and that we will work with SADC colleagues to try and find resolutions to the problem?
My Lord, so I'm sure the noble Lord, as an observer on Zimbabwe, and I commend his work in this respect, would have seen the two statements that we've issued since the elections, and I also agree with him about the importance of working with key regional partners, including SADC. SADC are deployed very much, and they are also making the same representations that we are, along with other key interested parties, to ensure that there is a pluralist approach when it comes to democracy, because democracy needs stability and security and inclusivity for it to be sustainable. That point has been made consistently to the Zimbabwean authorities.
My Lord.
To reiterate the point I've made before, that the ingredients of a thriving democracy are not limited to elections. Civil society's role is vital, and I welcomed his statement before the summer recess about the government's response about the legislation that's being introduced. But has his department acknowledged that, or made any representations about the new Labour Act which they're pushing through in Zimbabwe, which the Zimbabwean Congress of Trade Unions has warned it will allow the government to interfere in trade union administration? Will he